The trap game. People have different definitions of what a trap game is, but the way I look at it is like this. You've got a game coming up against a really good opponent, and a marquee game that is absolutely massive and will draw tons of eyeballs. It could be a rival, it could be one of the best teams in the league, you name it, it's something along those lines. Prior to that game, you've got a game against a team that is not that good and against a team that you're expected to beat pretty handily. So you let your guard down because you're so focused on the game after that one that you forget you still have to play this one. As a hypothetical example, let's say the Buffalo Bills have a game in 2 weeks against the Kansas City Chiefs, which is big for obvious reasons, because the Bills and the Chiefs are two of the best teams in football and cannot stand each other. And the week before that game, the Bills play the Tennessee Titans. The Titans proceed to catch the Bills off guard and win the game. And the Bills play one of their worst and sloppiest games of the season. We see something like this every year, and it's just natural human psychology. And while the definition of a trap game varies from person to person, and the phrase can definitely be overused and misused at times, generally speaking, you know it when you see it. Case in point, what happened in 1986 with the man you've been watching this entire time. This is wide receiver Art Monk, as in one of the greatest receivers in the history of the NFL. Monk was so good that not only is he a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but his number 81 jersey is also retired by Washington and will never be worn again. By the time Monk's 16-year career ended, with 14 of those seasons coming in the nation's capital, he had 940 receptions and 12,721 receiving yards, with his 940 catches being the second most in NFL history, only behind Jerry Rice, and his 12,721 receiving yards ranking fourth in NFL history, only behind Jerry Rice, James Lofton, and Steve Largent. Monk had 5 seasons with over 1,000 yards receiving, a 1984 season where he led the NFL in receptions, and he was an instrumental part throughout the Joe Gibbs tenure in helping Washington win the Super Bowl 3 times. However, he was not immune to the trap game, as we're about to find out. Because in 1986, during a game against the New Orleans Saints, in saying that trap games did not exist, Art Monk basically confirmed that trap games exist, and that his team fell victim to it, in a bizarre story that roughly 4 decades later deserves a deep dive today. Either that, or Art Monk is not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm inclined to go with the former on that one. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the craziest trap game in NFL history, or at least the craziest one you've never heard of before. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the game in '86 that Washington really wanted to 86. Before I talk about what Art Monk said that left a lot of people raising eyebrows and left everyone confirming the fact that this was indeed a trap game, we need some context to understand not just the game at hand and how the game itself went, but what the next game was. It's October 5th, 1986. It's week 5 of the NFL season, and as we've entered the second quarter of the year, we find ourselves at the Superdome for this NFC battle between Washington and New Orleans, as in a battle between two teams going in completely opposite directions. For Washington, they enter this game at 4-0, being one of just 4 teams left in the NFL with an undefeated record. Their defense to start off the season was superb, as after allowing just 61 points through the first 4 weeks, or barely over 15 points per game, they found themselves with the 4th best defense in football. And their offense, averaging 25 points per game, wasn't too shabby either. Quarterback Jay Schrader was on pace for a 4,000-yard season after 4 games, which was a very impressive feat back in 1986. And it seemed on paper like Washington had its quarterback of the future that they were looking for after Joe Theismann's gruesome injury. The defensive line, led by Charles Vann and Dexter Manley, already had 15 sacks through 4 games, as they were constantly in the backfield, making life a living nightmare for opposing offenses and opposing backfields. It truly seemed on paper like Washington was one of the best teams in football 1/4 of the way into the season, maybe the best team in football, and if they weren't the best, they were definitely in the discussion. The New Orleans Saints, on the other hand, not so much. The Saints had never made the playoffs before in franchise history. They had never even had a winning record in franchise history. And 4 weeks into 1986, it seemed like it was going to be more of the same for them, as they found themselves at 1-3 under first-year head coach Jim Mora. They ranked on the bottom half of the conference in points scored and points allowed 4 weeks in, and they really struggled to throw the football, averaging just 133 passing yards per game at a time when the average team was posting well over 200 yards per game. Bottom line, Washington was one of the best teams in football, and New Orleans was not. And because of this, Washington was expected to win this game pretty handily. If New Orleans was the team of all teams to deliver Washington its first loss of the season, it would have been one of the biggest upsets of the young season thus far. In fact, many people weren't even remotely concerned with whether or not Washington could win this game right here that you've been watching. They thought it was a foregone conclusion, because the real test wasn't this game, but rather the game the following week, which seemed like the biggest game of the season so far, not just for Washington, but in the entire NFL. Because 1 week later, Washington would be going on the road to Dallas to take on the Cowboys in one of the fiercest rivalries in all of football. Especially after Washington got swept by Dallas the year before, and especially with Dallas starting off the 1986 season strong, being 3-1 after 4 weeks, with the #1 offense in football, that game was looking like it was going to decide first place in the NFC East early on. This game against the Saints seemed like a very obvious candidate for a trap game. Facing a team that's not very good, and then the following week, you play your divisional rival in maybe the fiercest rivalry in the entire NFL at the time for first place in the division? This is the most trap game to ever trap in the history of traps. And while Washington ended up winning the game by a final score of 14-6, as you can tell from the highlights, it wasn't exactly the prettiest contest. No points were scored in the second half. Washington had under 300 yards of total offense at a time when the average team was easily eclipsing that mark. Mark Mosley missed a handful of field goals. Washington only had one play go for more than 20 yards, with the team defensively allowing over 5 yards per carry. On Washington's final 3 drives of the game, when they needed to lock in, they only picked up 19 yards, and it definitely seemed at times like they were going through the motions. Yes, Washington picked up the win, and that's all that matters at the end of the day, as this isn't college football, and you don't need style points. But it was not the prettiest game to watch, and Washington definitely played better games so far in 1986. This was one of those games where they were getting by on talent, especially in the second half when the offense completely stalled and got nothing going. Quarterback Jay Schrader even admitted as much, saying, "Our offense sputtered out there today. We're not going to be able to do that next week, or we'll get it handed to us." Which led to the obvious question, was this a trap game? Was Washington overlooking New Orleans here because the Dallas Cowboys were on the horizon in what was, objectively speaking, a much bigger and much more important game? Naturally, people on the team insisted that this wasn't a trap game, and that you couldn't overlook anyone in this league, and that this just wasn't one of their better days, and there's nothing more to it. But they got the win, and that's all that mattered. And then Art Monk opened his mouth, because Art Monk had something to say. Oddly enough, Monk was one of the few guys who played well for Washington on this day, having a team-high 7 catches for a team-high 80 yards and scoring a nice touchdown in the second quarter, the final points of the game, to make it 14-6 and make it a two-score contest, since again, back in 1986, there was no two-point conversion. But if you truly wanted to know whether or not this was a trap game, Monk, in denying the fact that it was a trap game, absolutely admitted that it was a trap game. Because as Monk said, I kid you not, I don't think anyone was thinking about Dallas. We knew we couldn't overlook St. Louis. If we came in here thinking about Dallas, it would be a long day. On paper, that's a fine answer, except for, 2 words. St. Louis? We knew we couldn't overlook St. Louis? Do you not even know the team you just played? You thought you just played the St. Louis Cardinals? Dude, you guys overlooked the Saints so much that you didn't even realize you were playing the Saints. Number one, Washington and St. Louis had not played each other all season at that point, so it's not as if Monk was referring to a previous game. The first 4 games of the season were against the Eagles, the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Seahawks. The last time the Cardinals were on the schedule was on December 21st, 1985. So where you got the St. Louis Cardinals from, I have no idea. Number 2, this game was on the road. You were playing the game in New Orleans. How do you confuse New Orleans and St. Louis, especially since you're a veteran and played in both these cities? Maybe if this was a home game, it would be a bit more understandable, I suppose. But you literally traveled. You flew into New Orleans. Do you not know the difference between the 2 cities? One of them has an outdoor stadium, and the other one has a dome. One of them has a giant arch, and the other one has Bourbon Street. One of them you can see water, and the other one is landlocked. New Orleans has a very distinct look, and St. Louis has a very distinct look. The 2 stadiums and the 2 cities could not be more different from each other. And I don't get how you can spend a weekend in New Orleans, play a game in New Orleans, and then think, after playing the Saints, that you played the St. Louis Cardinals. And no, before anyone asks, Monk did not have a concussion during this. He genuinely thought that his team just played the St. Louis Cardinals. You know when someone says they're not drunk, but they admit to being drunk by repeatedly asking what your name is? That's what this felt like. You can say all you want that this game right here that you've been watching wasn't a trap game. But when you say that you didn't overlook the Cardinals, despite the fact that you weren't playing the Cardinals, and you were literally in New Orleans, I think it's fair to say that you overlooked the Saints. For what it's worth, Washington lost 30-6 to Dallas the following week, completely laying an egg. So if they were looking ahead, it very clearly did not work. Although Washington would rebound after its first loss of the season to finish 12-4, make it to the playoffs as a wild card, and make it to the NFC Championship before losing to the New York Giants in shutout fashion. I would say getting shut out in the NFC Championship was the most awkward moment of the season for them if, this whole fiasco after the Saints game right here didn't exist. Look, trap games happen, even if it is subconscious. If you've got 2 things on the docket, and one seems way bigger and more important than the other, and the other one seems easier and seems like something that you can go on autopilot for, it's natural to not treat both tasks the same. But at the very least, if you're playing in the NFL, know what city you're playing in and know what team you're playing. If you say that something isn't a trap game and then manage to get the team you're playing wrong and the city that you're playing in wrong, I'm not really going to believe you when you say that it wasn't a trap game. And I don't think anyone else is either. Because in 1986, despite playing in New Orleans, Art Monk thought that everyone should meet him in St. Louis. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.